So let's implement the final pieces of functionality of our application. Let's see here the functionality that we want to implement. So let's say that Alice is in a thread with Bob and Chuck sends her a message. So what we want to do here is we want to mark this thread as unread with some CSS styling. Now, in order to do this, let's switch to a new branch because we have been doing a lot of coding since the last branch. We are going to make sure that we are in a stable situation, our application is in the correct state. Before going further, let's quickly switch back to our application and check out a new branch. Let's then head over to the terminal and type git branch. You should have visible here a mark unread threads branch. We are going to switch into it. Let's simply do git checkout and we are going to put in here the name of the branch mark unread threads. So you should have a message in your terminal saying switch to branch mark unread threads. So this is the starting point for the next section. We are going to complete our application. Let's start by marking the unread threads with some special CSS so that it's visible to the user which threads are unread. In order to implement this, let's switch back to our program. So we want to add this functionality at the level of the thread list component, which is a presentation component. We would like to add here a ng class statement, so we would like to add here a different CSS class. In this case, we are going to call it unread, and we want to highlight the thread as being unread if the current thread ID has unread messages for the current user. So if we switch back to the thread list component, we can see here that this is again another example of how the thread and the thread summary view model, although they are similar concepts, they are not exactly the same. So if we switch to the thread summary view model, what we want to do is to add here a Boolean flag that says if the thread has been read or unread for this particular user. So we are going to define it here as a Boolean. So as we can see, the thread summary VM, although initially might look like a thread, it's really a view model. It's a join between several models, namely participants, the thread itself, and the user information that is linked to the same thread. So now with the new Boolean flag added, we should get here a compilation error. This is in the selector function that is transforming the application state into the list of thread summaries that are going to be displayed here in the thread section. So here we are missing a property. Whenever we are mapping a thread to a thread summary, we are missing here the property that we have just added, read. And so how are we going to populate the read property? We have here all the information necessary at the level of the application state. We're going to say that first the thread is marked as read if the ID of the thread is identical to the current thread ID that the user has just selected. So we can retrieve the current thread ID from the UI state. So this is the first case when the thread is considered as read. The second case is when the counter for the participant in that thread is set to 0. So we are going to go to the thread, go to its participants, and we are going to access the current participant ID from the participants map. So we are going to take the participant ID from the UI state. So this corresponds to the currently selected user. And what we have here is the number of unread messages. So what we have accessed here is the number of unread messages for this participant in this thread. So if this number is identical to 0, the thread can also be considered as read. So now that we have the read property filled in at the level of our view model, we can go to our view and use this property to add or remove a CSS class. We are going to add it here at the level of the thread name, and we are going to use the standard Angular directive ng class. And using ng class, we are simply going to say the following. Let's add the unread CSS class. So if you go here, you will see that at the level of your chat-app.css file, you have here the definition of a class that is going to mark unread threads as red and in bold. So This is just so that it's clearly visible in the demo what threads are unread. We're going to switch back to the thread list component view and we're going to say add the unread CSS class if the thread is not read. And this should be all that is necessary to have this functionality up and running. Let's give it a try. Let's switch back to the browser. Let's select the left-hand side as being user Alice and let's select the first thread. Now the right-hand side we are going to select, for example, Erin. So we are going to select this thread where are 4 participants which include Alice. So if we now send a message to Alice, let's see what happens. Let's type hello Alice, hit enter, and as we can see the unread messages counter is marked as read. And we can see here that the thread is marked as unread. We can now add a couple of more messages to see that the counter is still correctly populated. Now our chat application is really almost done. We are really only missing one functionality. Take a look. If we select here another thread, the unread messages counter is still 4 because there were no new messages for that thread. But we would expect when we select this thread here that not only we can see the messages that were there, but also the counter should have been resetted back to 0. So let's implement this functionality. It's the last part of our application that is missing. It's coming right up in the next lesson.